The dirt road into the holler wasn't on any map, just a gash of red clay and gravel choked by kudzu and the sagging beards of ancient oaks. The air, thick and warm as broth, carried the sweet rot smell of black walnuts and something else, something metallic and faintly foul. The house waited at the end of it, not so much built as grown, a tumorous accretion of tar paper, warped timber, and corrugated tin, slumped against the Alabama hillside as if the earth were slowly digesting it. Its windows were cataracted with grime, but you felt watched all the same. Inside, the silence was a physical presence, a woolen blanket smothering the creak of floorboards and the low, wet whisper of breathing from the shadows. They moved through the cramped rooms with a shared, sluggish grace, their faces echoing one another in the dim light, the same close-set eyes, the same prominent brow, the same slackness around the mouth. They were a closed circle, the Crouches, bound by more than blood, bound by a secret that had curdled in their veins for generations, a secret that was just beginning to twist its newest blossom into a horrifying new shape. The discovery of the family photo album is never a casual event, it is an archaeological dig into a poisoned lineage. The album itself is a relic, bound in a material that was once fine, perhaps cracked leather or a fabric now stiff with age, but which now feels unnervingly like cold, dry skin to the touch. It is presented not with pride, but with a grim, ritualistic necessity, often by the family matriarch or patriarch whose own face is the living culmination of its pages. The initial photographs, sepia-toned and stiffly posed, seem deceptively normal. Here are the founding ancestors, their features stark and clear, their expressions severe but unremarkable. They look like any other pioneers, all hard angles and firm resolve, betraying no hint of the slow-burning fuse they had just lit within their own bloodline. As one turns the page into subsequent generations, the first subtle signs begin to emerge, visible only to an eye that knows what to look for, or one that is staring with horrified, dawning comprehension. It starts not with deformities, but with a strange consolidation of features. The distinctive family nose, once a strong characteristic on one face, now appears on nearly every face in the portrait. The spacing of the eyes, once unremarkable, becomes a recurring, slightly unsettling trait. The faces begin to look less like individuals and more like variations on a theme, as if God were running out of ideas. The photos from the mid-20th century hold the most damning evidence. The subjects are no longer posed with stern dignity but seem to slouch in their chairs, their expressions vacant or sullen. The physical markers shift from subtle to pronounced. A jawline appears a hair too heavy, a brow too prominent, casting deep shadows over the eyes. A lip curls in a way that seems congenital, not emotional. The final pages are the most harrowing, charting the family's descent from mere oddity into outright physical tragedy. The portraits become fewer, the subjects often hidden in shadow or captured in blurry, off-kilter snaps, as if the camera itself shied away from them. Here, a child's eyes are wide-set and unblinking. There, another's ear is a crumpled, shapeless thing. The family resemblance is now a monstrous, inescapable cage. You are not looking at a family tree, but at a gnarled and blighted root, coiling ever tighter upon itself. The album does not just document their history, it is a confession, a visual testament to a crime committed over and over again in the name of purity, isolation, or some twisted, long-forgotten pride. It is the story of a people who, in their quest to keep the world out, ended up trapping themselves in a genetic echo chamber from which there was no escape, only a slow, inexorable fade into a final, silent scream. The arrival of the outsider is the puncture wound in the family's insulated world, a sudden, violent introduction of fresh air into a sealed tomb. This figure, be it a census taker clinging to a clipboard like a shield, a lost hiker with a dead cell phone and expensive boots, or a deputy sheriff following up on a decades-old missing persons report, brings with them the scent of a reality the family has long since forsaken. They are a walking anachronism, their language too quick, their gaze too direct, their very posture an affront to the slouching, furtive rhythms of the homestead. The initial encounter is never overtly monstrous. The horror is in the subtle, gathering wrongness that prickles on the outsider's skin. It's in the way the family members emerge from doorways and from behind trees, not with curiosity, but with a silent, unified assessment, as if a single nerve has been touched. They do not move to greet the stranger so much as they congregate, forming a loose, physical barrier between the outsider and the heart of the property. The dialogue is a masterclass in evasion, a verbal chess game played with missing pieces. Simple, direct questions: how many children live here? Or what's the family name on the deed? Are met with answers that are technically truthful but spiritually vacant, or deflected with offers of suspicious hospitality. You look tired. Come sit on the porch. The well water's cold. The family's communication is laced with a shared, unspoken context that the outsider cannot access, their sentences often trailing off or finished by another with a knowing glance. It is this very lack of explicit threat that curdles the blood. The menace is ambient, a low-frequency hum beneath the surface of southern courtesy. The outsider's senses, honed by a normal world, scream that the geometry of this place is all wrong, the angles of the roofs are too sharp, the silence between the crickets' chirps is too deep, and the faces of the children, peering from behind stained curtains, hold a knowledge that no child should possess. This intrusion of the normal into the aberrant cannot be tolerated, and the family's reaction is a swift, organic immune response. The politeness, thin to begin with, begins to crack, revealing the hostility beneath. A brother's hand might rest a little too long on the handle of a wood-splitting maul. The matriarch's smile might freeze into a rictus that doesn't reach her deadfish eyes. The tone shifts from passive obstruction to active, quiet intimidation. They begin to close ranks, their bodies physically shifting to block the outsider's line of sight to a particular shed or root cellar. The message becomes terrifyingly clear: you are not welcome here, not because you are a stranger, but because you are other. You are a contaminant. And the only way to restore the sanctity of their closed system is to either expel you by any means necessary, or, in a far more terrifying possibility, find a way to make you a part of it. The matriarch's feverish confession is the cracked keystone of the entire twisted edifice. It does not come in a state of calm rationality, but in a moment of physical or mental crisis, a raging fever, a fit of grief, or a sudden, profound break with reality. Her words, often directed at a captive and horrified listener, are not an apology but a justification, a warped theology spoken with the fervor of a fire and brimstone preacher. She speaks of a sacred duty to keep the bloodline untainted by a corrupt outside world, of a covenant made with God or the land itself generations ago. This belief system, born from isolation and paranoia, has calcified into dogma, reframing their genetic decay not as a self-inflicted curse, but as a divine trial or a necessary sacrifice for purity. This moment reveals that the horror is not merely biological, it is ideological, passed down with the same care as a family heirloom, and far more destructive. The first undeniable physical deformity in a newborn is the point of no return, the living, breathing proof that their project has failed. This is not a subtle asymmetry or a minor peculiarity, but a profound malformation, a cleft that refuses to close, limbs that have fused, or a skull that has failed to form correctly. This child, the embodiment of their sin, shatters the family's fragile denials. It can no longer be hidden or explained away as strong family features. It forces a violent schism within the family itself, pitting those who see the child as a monster to be secreted away against those who, in their deeper delusion, might see it as a sacred, if tragic, emblem of their sacrifice. This internal tension inevitably boils over into a violent, feral act committed by one of the more afflicted members. This is not premeditated cruelty, but a sudden, instinctual eruption, a shocking act of brutality against an animal, the outsider, or even another family member. It demonstrates that the corruption has seeped into the mind, eroding the barriers of civilization and leaving only base, unpredictable instinct. This violence shatters any remaining pretense of normalcy and reveals the true, dangerous instability festering within the home. The discovery of the hidden nursery or locked room is the grim archaeology of their tragedy. This space, often a root cellar, a boarded-up bedroom, or a tool shed, is the family's secret ossuary. Within it are the results of their failed experiments, the children who did not survive their birth defects, or those whose conditions were too severe to be presented even to the limited light of the holler. They are the living and the dead, kept in shadow, their existence a shameful secret even within a house of secrets. Finding this room is to understand the full, horrific cost of their tradition, to see the cumulative weight of their suffering. This cumulative horror finally sparks a flicker of clarity in one of the younger, less afflicted members, a teenage girl, perhaps, or a boy with a spark of curiosity. Seeing the outsider, or the new deformed child, or the contents of the locked room, they experience a terrifying epiphany. Their family is not special or chosen, but sick and trapped. Their entire world is a prison built from bone and blood, and the desire for escape, for something beyond the kudzu-choked horizon, becomes a dangerous, all-consuming thought. This desire for escape forces the family's final, most dreadful decision. Faced with the dual threats of the outsider's knowledge and the internal rebellion, they do not choose simple murder or expulsion. Their twisted logic demands a more complete solution: assimilation. The plan is formed to not only silence the outsider permanently but to forcibly incorporate them into the bloodline, or to break the will of the rebellious family member through the same oppressive traditions they seek to flee. It is the ultimate act of a closed system seeking to maintain its integrity by consuming any threat, a final, chilling affirmation that there is no way out, only a deeper descent into the dark. The horror of the Crouch family was not an accident of nature, it was a cultivated thing, a garden of poison blooms tended by generations. Its roots were not in simple ignorance, but in a deeply held and fiercely defended belief system, one that found its most fervent high priestess in the matriarch, Granny Hester. Her confession was not born of a guilty conscience, for she possessed none, but from a fever that burned away the last vestiges of her sanity, leaving only the raw, pulsing dogma beneath. It happened on a night when the air was so thick with humidity that every breath felt like drowning. She was laid out on a mattress stained with time and sickness, her body a wisp of bone and parchment skin, but her eyes burned with a terrifying, prophetic fire. She fixed her gaze not on any family member, but on the cracked, water-stained ceiling, as if addressing some vengeful god only she could see. Her voice was a dry rattle, yet it carried an undeniable, chilling authority. "They think we're filth," she whispered, her tongue darting out to wet cracked lips. "The ones from the blacktop. They with their mixed blood and city ways. They bring the world's rot with them. But we are the pure stream. The Lord told my granddaddy, he did. He said, 'Abner, you keep my well clean. You let not the filth of the world muddy my waters.'" She then spun a tale not of sin, but of sacred duty. She spoke of a covenant made with the land itself, a promise that their blood, kept undiluted, would grant them a strength the outside world could never understand. The physical toll, the slow stiffening of joints, the peculiarities of feature, these were not the consequences of inbreeding. In her theology, they were marks of divine favor, trials to test their faith, or even a gathering of power, a concentration of their essence. "The blood is the life," she would croon, clutching at the frayed quilt. "And our life is ours alone. It's the price for being chosen. The world ain't for us, and we ain't for the world." This revelation was the key that unlocked the true nightmare. Their actions were not those of monsters who knew their own monstrosity, but of fanatics who saw their own decay as a form of holiness. This warped faith, however, was about to be confronted by its most damning evidence. The birth of little Ira was the family's point of no return, the moment their self-constructed mythology crumbled before biological reality. His mother, Lisa, had been the family's last hope for a clean child, having been kept somewhat more isolated than the others. The delivery took place in the stifling heat of the main room, attended by Granny Hester and the aunts. When the child emerged, the usual hushed murmurs were replaced by a dead, suffocating silence. The deformity was not something that could be hidden or explained away as a strong chin or deep-set eyes. The infant's spine was twisted in a pronounced S-shape, his tiny head lolled at an impossible angle, and one of his eyes was sealed shut beneath a lid of fused, waxy skin. He was a living, breathing refutation of Granny Hester's covenant. The uncles looked away, their faces grim masks of shame and anger. The aunts wept, not with joy, but with a kind of weary despair. Even Granny Hester, for a fleeting moment, saw the truth in that tiny, broken form, not a sacred trial, but a failure. The child was swiftly wrapped in a blanket and hidden away in a back room, a secret to be kept even from some within the household, a testament to their bloodline's final, irreversible corruption. The pressure of this new shame, layered upon generations of silent suffering, had to find a release. It came in the form of Elijah, Lisa's older brother, a man whose mind had been one of the first casualties of the family's declining stock. He was hulking and quiet, his expressions slow, his understanding of the world limited to immediate sensations. The catalyst was a stray dog, a skinny, friendly hound that had wandered up to the property, barking and wagging its tail. For the others, it was a nuisance. For Elijah, it was an intrusion of the chaotic outside world, a spark to the tinder of his feral instincts. He did not chase it off. With a calm, terrifying purpose, he cornered it near the rusted-out truck. There was no anger in his face, only a vacant curiosity. What followed was not a frenzied attack, but a methodical, brutal dissection of the animal with a skinning knife, his movements unnervingly precise. He did not do it for food or for sport, but seemingly to understand it, to silence its alien noise, to make it a part of the stillness he knew. When Lisa stumbled upon the scene, the bloody ruin of the dog and her brother kneeling beside it, his hands and face smeared red, she didn't scream. She simply backed away, the understanding dawning that the sickness was not just in the body of her newborn son, but in the soul of her brother. The violence was not an aberration, it was the family's true nature, stripped of its religious pretension. This series of horrors propelled Lisa, her maternal instincts sharpened by grief and terror, to seek the source of her family's affliction. She had heard whispers all her life of the quiet room, a place never pointed out, a door that was always locked. After the incident with Elijah, she waited until the dead of night, when the house was lost in its thick, drugged sleep, and she pried the lock loose with a rusted nail. The smell that rolled out was ancient, a mix of soil, decay, and unwashed flesh. The room was not a nursery in any sense of the word. It was a tomb. There were no cribs, only pallets on the dirt floor. In the corner, curled in on herself, was her Aunt Rose, a woman she had been told died as a child. Rose was alive, but her mind was gone, her body twisted by scoliosis so severe she could not stand. She hummed a tuneless, endless melody. In the shadows, Lisa saw other shapes, other failed experiments of the bloodline, a cousin born with a heart defect that left him blue and gasping, another whose cleft palate had never been repaired, leaving her isolated in a world of incomprehensible sounds. This was the family's legacy. Not strength. Not purity. This hidden charnel house was the real covenant, a museum of their suffering, where they stored their mistakes out of a twisted sense of duty and shame. They were not keeping the world out, they were building their own private hell within. Standing in that room, breathing in the stink of her own lineage, something broke inside Lisa. The scales fell from her eyes. The stories Granny Hester told were not scripture, they were the desperate lies of a people trying to sanctify their own decay. The family resemblance was not a badge of honor, it was the brand of a slave. The Holler was not a sanctuary, it was a prison whose walls were made of their own interwoven DNA. A desperate, primal need for escape ignited within her. It was no longer a vague wish but a concrete, terrifying plan. She would take her broken son, Ira, and she would run. She would brave the unknown terrors of the outside world, because she now understood they could be no worse than the certain, slow death that resided within these walls. She would rather her son perish under an open sky than live another day in this gothic nightmare of their own making. This flicker of rebellion did not go unnoticed. The family, for all its sickness, possessed a hive-like sensitivity to threat. Granny Hester, even in her fevered state, sensed the shift in Lisa's energy. The uncles saw the new determination in her eyes, a look they had not seen since a wild fox they'd once trapped had chewed off its own leg. A council was held in hushed tones in the kitchen, away from the listening walls. The options were laid bare. They could let her go, and risk her telling their secrets, bringing the filth of the world down upon them. Or they could silence her. But simple murder was wasteful, and expulsion was an admission of failure. Their solution, born of generations of closed-loop logic, was far more dreadful. The family would assimilate the threat. Lisa would not be allowed to leave. She would be watched, guarded, and broken. Her spirit would be bent back to the family's will. And as for her desire for the outside, they reasoned with their own impeccable, terrifying insanity, perhaps it was time to strengthen the waning bloodline. One of the unmarried uncles would be tasked with being a new husband for her, to recenter her loyalties and produce a new, properly devoted child. The rebellion was not met with violence, but with a suffocating, possessive embrace. The system, faced with a flaw, sought not to eject it, but to consume it, pulling Lisa and her son back into the dark, swirling vortex of the bloodline, ensuring that the story of the Crouches would have no escape, only another grim, predictable, and soul-chilling chapter.